Welcome back to another episode of the Financial Dad podcast. Today we are joined by a special guest, Laura Hunter-Drago, who I actually met through a project that we worked on together. She is a writer and producer, and she's made a couple of audio dramas, and I was lucky enough to act in one of them. So that's how we met, because she cast me in a project. Um, so we're so excited to have her here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about being a freelancer in the entertainment industry and being an entrepreneur and all that fun stuff. So, Laura, thank you for being here.
Thank you for
I
having me.
I would love it if you could tell us about how you got into this space, how you started all of this, because you do a few different things, and I know you started as an actor, so I would
Yeah,
love if you could kind of like take us through this journey. Like, did you always know that you were going to be an entrepreneur, or was this a surprise?
that was a surprise. No, I was going to be an Oscar-winning actress at 22. And I was never going to work another job ever in my life. That is what I thought. No, I did. I went to college in New York. I went to NYU, which Hallie also went to NYU. And I lived there for about 8 years. And I think I had this sort of mindset of like, if I'm going to be an actor, then I have to suffer. And I'm not going to make money unless it's from acting, because if I do that, if I'm like successful in any other realm, then that means I failed at this thing that I say I want to do. So it took me a little bit to realize like that out of necessity, I needed to make money. And I worked a lot of really awful jobs, like very sketchy bar, restaurant kind of situations in New York. Didn't make a lot of money, especially for such an expensive city. Um, and when I moved to LA in sort of like my later 20s, mid 20s, I realized I had to figure out something else that I was going to do. And also not just because I needed the money, but because it just wasn't fulfilling to be kind of, I mean, you know how it is as an actor, you're sort of like waiting for auditions. There's not always a lot going on. You
Yeah.
can sort of fill your day, but it's you don't feel accomplished a lot of the time as an actor. And I definitely was like experiencing that. And funnily enough, so as a kid, I designed websites as like a hobby. I like taught myself
Hmm.
HTML when I was in middle school. And so it was just something I had always kind of done, and I needed to do it for acting because I did my own website, and then sometimes I would do like actor friends sort of things. And then someone one day was like, people get paid a lot to do this. And I was like, oh, interesting, interesting. And so I started doing a little bit of that. And then at the same time, social media was becoming something that companies did, because it was originally really like a thing that you would do on your Facebook when you were only, you're too young for this, but you used to only be able to get on Facebook if you were in a college and you could just talk to your
Hmm.
friends. Now it's a whole corporate thing. And so I had kind of like come up in that era, and I had like graphic design skills and these web design skills. And I sort of like put that into this sort of like new social media thing that was happening. And I started out taking kind of random, like on, I think now it's Upwork, but it used to be Elance, like random jobs with companies doing their social media or doing their website. And then eventually I was like, wait, I could do this at a higher level because I have these skills. So I started working for like Fortune 500 companies and people in the health and tech world. And that's kind of where I've been since. And I've done a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I still do web design, not as much social media anymore, just because that's changed so much. And it's like you kind of have to like be all in on that just to keep up with it. I do a lot of like project management for conferences. I'll like manage a conference, people's presence there, and setting up their booth and things like that. And then I also do audio editing, and I produce a couple of podcasts for larger companies that are in like the AI world. And it's interesting because, a lot of this stuff that I learn doing those things does end up feeding back into my creative life. Like, for example, with the Crime at Camp Ashwood, which Hallie was in. I edited all the audio for that, and I know how to do that because of work. So it's sort of like I found a way to like let some of the creative stuff feed into the corporate stuff, and then vice versa. So that's sort of the gist of what I do. And then outside of that, I write. I'm a screenwriter and a producer, as Hallie said, and just that's just the, the grind of the entertainment industry.
Yeah, we all wear so many hats
Yeah.
at the same time. Well, so it's interesting what you're saying about your corporate jobs feeding into your creative development. I think that is something that a lot of creative people have to do is find something that will make you more stable money but also be valuable to you in your life in some way, and in some way fulfilling that creative bug that we all have. So that's really interesting, and that's cool that that was helpful. For people who are not involved in the entertainment industry, have like absolutely no idea how it
Me.
works when you are Bridget, um,
Oh,
when you are producing your own project. And honestly, this is helpful for me too because I am very much at the beginning of producing. I'm wondering how it works for you getting funding for projects, if that is something that you feed into yourself from the income you're making from other jobs, or if you are pitching to companies. I would love to
yeah.
hear about that process.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And it's interesting right now, especially the industry is in a very strange place of like flux where we don't really know what's going to be happening. I do think it's going to move more and more towards people kind of funding their own stuff. It has been moving that direction, but I think it will be even more in the next handful of years. That's just a guess. But for me, the way I self-fund a lot of stuff. Like for example, Ashwood, because I can edit the audio and stuff, it's not super expensive for me to just fully produce that. I mean, I'll never make money back on that. I mean, never say never. If I sell the TV pilot version that is written, um, but I won't make money back on the podcast. You don't make a lot. You make like pennies on the dollar doing a podcast. It's sometimes I think you have to know why you're doing something, and sometimes the reason not it's not for financial gain. It's because you know that it's going to get your name out there in a certain way, and that project has done a lot for me as a writer. So it's like you have to kind of like pick and choose things. I've produced a feature film. For that, we did a crowdfunding campaign, which was great. I feel like you get one in your life. That's just my feeling on it because I always feel now I'm like I don't want to do that again. It was a lot, and I ended up probably putting in 50% of the money for that movie on my own. So we raised a certain amount and then I put in like the same amount myself. And that was sort of a similar situation where we've actually made a little money back on that, and that it's called To the New Girl and it's on like Tubi and a bunch of other streaming services. And so you make money every time it runs. And that it surprises me sometimes. I'll look one month and all of a sudden a bunch of people have found it and it's been out for 4.5 years now. So it's like you live with something forever. That's someone told me that early on when I started producing. They were like, when you make something, you forget that you have it forever. It's not just that like release week or like the first 6 months or whatever. Sometimes say an actor that was in a project, let's say Hallie becomes, the biggest star in the world, which I totally think she could. Then all of a sudden Ashwood is going to blow up because you just don't know like, what's going to happen with
Hey, a
stuff like that.
rising
Hey,
tide raises all
hey,
ships, right?
hey. Well,
Yeah.
even last month, or 2 months ago in October, because it was Halloween, for some reason we ended up on like a Spotify list and we had like 100,000 listeners in one day. That
Oh
was
my
like
God.
random. Yeah. I mean, I had no idea. So, you're just kind of like riding it out a little bit with stuff like that. But yeah, I think one of the reasons I continue to work and do the more corporate side of things is so that I can take that money and kind of reinvest it in my own career, which is at this point in my life, I'm like more interested in doing that than say like going on a crazy vacation or
Mm.
spending money on other things. I'm just like in a phase right now, I think for the next like decade of my life where I'm like really focused on what can I make and put out into the world and stuff. And so for me, those things are not necessarily about making money, but like they're sort of investments in myself and what I want to do.
I totally resonate with the need of balance between creative projects but also money coming in. And I'm curious how it felt for you in the beginning because you've obviously been like freelancer, entrepreneur, creative for a while.
Yeah.
How was it for you to manage, your money? Like, did you have any relationship with money? Like, what were you doing in the beginning?
No, no. I was really dumb about all of it for a pretty long time. I wish that would be like my one thing that if I could go back and tell myself at like 21 is just like that it wouldn't take away that doing more would only add to my life rather than like, oh, if I just really thought that if I diverted my attention, and I think we're told as actors, musicians, any kind of creative person is kind of told that story of like, oh, you're going to be working in this, whatever bar job you have. But actually, in terms of my time and my schedule, working in as a consultant, my time is so much more flexible than if I was still bartending. Like I can't imagine. And it wasn't like this at the beginning. At the beginning, I had more kind of like strict hours. And when I took those initial like bigger corporate jobs with the Fortune 500 companies, those were like full-time jobs that were 40 hours a week. Not necessarily 9 to 5, but pretty close. And I feel like I had to do those for a little bit just to get the ability to kind of say, hey, I worked at a place like this in this sort of capacity, and now I can consult because of that. So I kind of had to like bite the bullet for 2 or 3 years. And that's, paid off now. Because I can sort of stack my days now. If you want to talk about schedule and stuff, we can do that. Once I kind of figured out like, oh, I can make money doing this stuff, and if I do that, then I get returns on the other things, then my brain sort of readjusted pretty quickly to like, oh, this is the way to do things.
Well, it's interesting too. I think like what you're talking about is really important. That we need to accept as creatives that we cannot rely on our creative. It's, I feel like some people think that this is like a dream killer to hear that you cannot rely on your art to make you money. But it's just because we have this unrealistic idea that obviously we believe in ourselves, we have talent, and we do, right? That's why we do it, and it feels fulfilling. But you're not just going to immediately break into an industry and make a ton of money and, gain a name for yourself and stuff. It's just an unrealistic expectation that we dream about when we're just starting out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's really valuable to note that working in another field to support yourself does not mean you're not a creative. It does not mean that you are not still an actor or still a writer or
Yes.
still an artist in some way. I think that that's just an important thing to note, because also getting money, being financially stable, will help you put more of your resources and more of your energy later down the line into your creative pursuits. I think that's something people don't think about, is that when you are financially stable and you are having all of your needs met, you're in a better place to actually pursue your art.
100%, 100%. And the other thing I would say is that, like, as someone who works in marketing, I am always being creative doing that. Like, it's a creative job. And the thing that has shocked me over and over again, because when I first started interviewing for jobs like that, I would never tell them I was an actor. I never said anything about anything I did in the entertainment industry. I was like trying to convince them that I was going to be like dedicated, But what's interesting is that it's something that in interviews people love, because they want to hear about that side of the world. And also so many people that I work with in the corporate world were either a musician growing up, or they're still in a band, or they do community theater, or so there's a lot of creativity in the corporate world. Like, people grow up doing artistic stuff. And so now I always kind of lead with it rather than hide it, because I think that it only helps you. And, like, actors are natural born marketers, because it's really, we think about the human condition a lot. And that's what marketing is. Like, you're thinking about how someone else would respond to a product or a company, their services, or whatever it is, that, you're sort of like getting into their character when you're like writing their content stuff. And that's how I've always convinced myself. I'm like, I'm just acting.
Just really putting yourself into their shoes.
I want to just like make a comment here, because on a personal note, this is the exact moment I'm in. Like, everything you're saying is like exactly where I'm in. I'm about to have a baby. I've been an entrepreneur for 7 years and still not at the place that I would, like to be. So I'm in this like really beautiful transition of feeling like I'm moving into a different season of wanting more stability,
Yeah.
a little bit less of the creativity, so I can just pour creativity into new life
Yeah.
instead of business, right? Yeah, very exciting. But it just, yeah, I really love what you're saying, because I do think for entrepreneurs, it can be scary to come to terms with that, because you say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a creative, like
Yeah.
there's no other part of that equation or that relationship, and it can look however we want it to look. And coming
Yep.
to terms with that, like I just love what you're saying, everything.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest things you need to be in sort of any entrepreneurial life is just that flexibility. And like you're always adjusting to things because things are always shifting in either your business or your life. It's like, how does the puzzle fit together? So you'll figure it
Well,
out as you go.
speaking of flexibility and your schedule, I'm curious how you manage your time working between,
Yeah.
jobs where you're responsible to other people and then your own projects, and if you've kind of found something that works for you. Because I know, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I am working on like several projects, but then I also have a job and then I'm working on a shoot, like sometimes my brain feels like it's going to explode.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear how you organize your life and your work.
Yeah, I will say it has changed. Like I said, when I started at the beginning of doing this sort of like lifestyle, I was much more beholden to the sort of schedule of other people, and now that I'm more on the consultant side, it's a little bit easier. I've been with the same marketing firm and they work a bunch of different clients, and so it's always something new and we can kind of like pick and choose within that like what we want to be a part of. I've been with them for like 10 years now. And so they know me really well and kind of know my deal where it's like, oh, she's going to be gone sometimes for a minute because she's doing other things. And I also have transitioned a little bit more in the last year to my husband's a realtor and I'm doing a lot of marketing for him now. And we're kind of like working that side of things together. And then I'm dealing with like podcast editing for companies and things like that. And so some of this, I'm taking more things now that have that flexibility. Like, for example, audio editing, I can do at 2 a.m. and no one's going to care as long as it gets done, rather than like project management, which is very time intensive and you have to like keep the hours of the company that you're working with. So I'm trying at this point to take more things that are flexible rather than things that are a little bit less so. And I also try very hard for writing purposes because I find that if I'm going to write something creative, if I'm working on a screenplay or something, if I wake up that morning and I have a bunch of work, I'm not going to write that day. Like it's just, it won't happen. I'll try, but it will be like I'm ruining what I'm doing or I'm doing bad edits. So I try to stack my days where like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday will be like my work days. And then I'll have the end of the week that I know, okay, this day is a writing day. I'm going to wake up and kind of like have the space to be creative. So I try pretty hard to have all of that stuff. And then, for example, at the beginning of next year, I have a year-long project that I'm going to be a part of, and I know that it's going to take a ton of my time. And so this month, I'm actually trying to almost like stack for next year, of like kind of like getting things scheduled and set that I won't have to deal with as much, hopefully in January. It in theory it all works out all the time, but sometimes there are weeks that I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing.
That is so real.
Is what
I
it
can
is.
very much relate to that.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we organize it all
Yeah.
in our mind? How do we do this? And I'm curious for you, do you have, you've been entrepreneur doing so many different things like over the years, do you have a team of people that you trust? And what I mean by this is like from a financial perspective, do you have like that go-to accountant? Do you have that like go-to lawyer for all the contracts that you might need to draft up for like all the creative projects? Do you have like a financial person? Like what does that look like for you as an entrepreneur, as a contractor, as a consultant, all those
Yeah,
things?
I am that it's something I'm not great at is like outsourcing to other people in general. I do keep really good track myself all year and then at the end of the year kind of like dump it on the same person over and over again. Um And then in terms of like my own, I don't do a lot. Every now and then I hire somebody to help me with something, like whether it's graphics. Sometimes I help people launch self-published books and things like that. So sometimes I'll like hire an editor, things like that. I'm bad at trusting people. I'm an Aries like times five, and
Singer
so
songwriter on Fiverr to make
yeah,
a theme
yes,
song
yeah,
for
100%.
an
Yeah,
audio
Fiverr,
drama called The Crime of
Fiverr
Kardashian
and comes in handy.
that I
Although
end
to
up
be honest,
changing most.
your like original rendition was better anyway.
You
So
know, we collaborated, the
yes,
three
we
of us, you, me, and that
did.
guy.
That guy from Australia. I think he's from Australia. I think that's right. You
Oh.
never know what you're getting. But yeah, no, I mean, I try, and I think I'm hoping that in the next kind of season of my life that I'm doing more of that and like finding more people to rely on. But it hasn't been my strong suit in the past. I'll say that.
Yeah, I totally hear you. It is hardest. I think also it's an entrepreneurial trait because we are such go-getters. We are self-starters. Like my motto has always been get shit done and like I'll do it best. So it is then hard to trust and outsource and yeah, figure out even what to tell people, especially when you're just getting started. It's like how do we take what's in our brain and
Yeah,
what we do naturally and then put that into an SOP? Like that's hard for
it's
most
hard.
people to do.
Yeah, I agree. I have friends that do similar things to me, and they have like employees that they work with on the daily, and it's awesome, like great, good for them. But to me, it's like one step too many. Where I'm like, I don't want to be that big of a of a business in this area. Yeah.
Totally. A couple more questions before we close out today. Curious about your relationship with money growing up. What was that like for you?
That's interesting. I've never really thought about that. I I kind of had like two worlds in a way. My parents were divorced. Um, and so in some senses I think I grew up with like a sense of like of understanding the like benefit of money, and I would like experience like having it, but in another sense I was raised by a single mom, and so we didn't really have a lot growing up, and I don't think it was something that I'm not sure it's something I thought I deserved, if that makes sense. In that it was just not really a part of my life, and so I think that is those like initial years out of college where I like hadn't really figured it out. I think part of it was that where I was just like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be poor. And so I didn't realize it was an option, I don't think, until I got a little bit older. That's a lot to think about. That's
No,
like
it's
a whole thing to unpack with my therapist.
well, it's interesting because I do feel like your relationship to money growing up, even if you're not aware of it, it affects how you deal with it as an adult. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sure feeling like you didn't deserve it or like you should be poor because you're an actor or like that changes how you go about things. Like,
Yeah.
when you believe that you should be a struggling artist, you're not going to be thinking long term about what you can do now to help yourself so that you won't be one later. You've just accepted that you are one.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, too. It's just, and I don't know, maybe it's changing a little bit now that more people work from home and more people do like flexible things. But yeah, the narrative that I was sold was like, you're going to be at Denny's, like slinging pancakes, like really. And so it just didn't occur to me. I thought, oh, then there's that magical day that the casting director comes down from the sky and like puts you in some sort of $1 million. And then the other reality of the entertainment industry is that a lot of actors don't make that much money, even if you're seeing them in major TV and film
yeah.
productions. Like
Well,
it's not.
especially because the jobs don't, you're not constantly working. As an
Yeah.
actor, you're constantly auditioning, but you're not necessarily constantly working, even if you are successful and are on a big show or a big blockbuster movie. That's only a few months out of the year.
Yeah, and it can happen quick. I've known people who had, a pretty quick like rise to success, who then years later didn't have those years of struggle where they had to kind of learn how to supplement in between, and they have to kind of like relearn that. Someone once told me that your career is like it's like a circle, and all your peers around you, like some people start here at the top and then they have to do this, and some people start here and have to do this, and you just don't know. It's unpredictable is the main.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I hope that us saying this isn't going to deter anyone from trying this career route, but
No.
I think it's good to point out there is a certain level of mental toughness and determination that you need to have to pursue any creative career,
Yeah.
because if you don't, you're going to see that you're not making money and either decide you're not good enough to do it or that it's never going to work out. And I think the reality is that you probably are good enough to do it, but it working out doesn't necessarily look like what you thought it did.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
To close this out, I would love to hear any advice you have for other freelancers in the industry, especially anything you feel like it would have been helpful for you to hear when you were starting out that would have made you feel better or just more prepared to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is really just getting over the idea of what you think your life should look like. And really start thinking about the reality of like what you can control in your life. And one of those things that you can control is how much money that you're bringing in and what kind of jobs you're searching for, and what kind of skills that you have that can earn you that money. If you're, like I said, actors are all like natural born marketers, but if you are a natural born marketer and don't have, tech skills that you sort of need in that industry, like that's the kind of thing to build up. You can also use that in your creative life. So it's like get on Adobe or Canva or one of those things and learn. A lot of that stuff you can self-teach, or YouTube now, you can learn pretty much anything. Look at it as, it's kind of like when people say they have a second kid and they didn't think that their heart could grow to love that child more, like, but you expand and you grow like as you add more to your life. So like take on more things and be open to the fact that you might find something really exciting in it. You might help launch somebody's book that is a huge success and you're helping someone else's creative career in that way, or you might find a job that you get to connect with people over social media all the time. Like look for what is exciting about it, and don't limit yourself based on some sort of like narrow idea you had as a 5-year-old about what you should be doing. Like, take the steps to be independent financially and to be able to like make your own decisions, and then you can pay for things that you want to do and enjoy life more. So yeah, don't limit yourself, I think would be the biggest.
Yeah, and follow what lights you up while also being practical about
Yes.
your needs.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Don't be the person that like has to leave town because you didn't ever like get the job that supported you. Like, because then what if you were here 2 more months and you got the thing you really wanted, So I've
Yeah.
seen it happen. If you're around long enough, you'll see.
Yeah, I'm
LA
sure.
is crazy. Yeah.
To close this out, I would love for you to share with the audience what you're working on now, anything you want to plug, where they can find you. Shout it from the rooftops.
So you can pretty much find everything related to me on my website, which is just laurahunterdrago.com. You can listen to Hallie and her lovely acting skills in The Crime at Camp Ashwood, which is on anywhere you listen to podcasts. I have another podcast called St. Mary's School for Children with the Stigmata you can listen to. And then what I'm working on now, many things. I have a big project that I can't talk about yet that hopefully is going to be public in the next few weeks that I'm going to be spending all of next year on making a film. So I am going to be working on that. And yeah, just always writing and then doing the 100 other things that I that I do every week for work.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Laura. This has been such a treat. I'm so glad that we got to do this. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your advice and your experience. I think that this is going to be a really great episode. And
yeah.
I hope that everyone enjoyed listening.
Thanks,
And,
guys.
We'll see you next time.